She wants a new home and he wants a fixer-upper. Typical marital conundrum, right? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. But what I want to do right now is tell you this story about this couple who went through this. First, I'll tell you about what it was like when I first met Mark. Within 30 seconds, he made it uber clear to me that he was going to finish his fixer-upper. So what happened is Emily had contacted me because a friend of hers gave her my number, somebody who I'd helped buy and sell a few homes. And she called me because she was upset that she and her husband had bought this home that needed a lot of repairs. And it was kind of Mark's dream to go through and fix up a home. He'd seen lots of videos on YouTube and so forth. So they bought this home, and now it's 3 months later, and they've got a couple little ones, twin boys, 4 years old, and they're living in this house on one side while Mark fixes up the other side. When I met Mark and they started telling me this story, it was also clear that he kind of wanted to stifle her opinion. He really wanted his opinion to be the winning opinion, and he didn't want to be talked out of this at all. She felt like she wasn't being heard, and I think that's part of why she invited me to be there, is just to kind of hear this whole thing through. So we began talking about it, and obviously she was really frustrated trying to raise these kids in this house with all the dust, all the noise, and all the disarray from construction. So I don't know if you've ever been through anything like this, but I would suggest if you do want to remodel a house, don't live in it while you're working on it. Really hard to do. I'm sure you've already picked up on the fact that this young husband hasn't really learned how to trust the wisdom of his wife yet. As you'll see, he's going to kind of pay dearly for that because he makes a few mistakes along the way. Just to set this up a little bit, Mark knows in his mind that she's going to come around. He just needs to get a little bit further along in the project, and she's going to see that he had everything under control all along. She just needs to be a little more patient, right? Now, keep in mind, she's living in a house with no flooring, lots of dust, and lots of chaos. And I don't think there's too many wives out there who are going to want to put up with something like this. Am I right or am I right? You tell me. And as we talk further, Mark eventually verbally insists that he can see this through, and Emily ultimately reluctantly agrees. There's not much I can do other than point out the pros and cons of going through with this process versus doing something else for their living arrangement. So Mark decides to push through. So this next part is priceless. Wait till you hear what happens to this guy. So he's working away, and he is working on the master bathroom, and he's working on all the pipes, and he's got a landscaper outside working on the landscaping, and he really feels like he's making some progress here. And because everything's in disarray, they can't really use their kitchen on a consistent basis, so out to dinner they go, him and his wife and the kids, and when they come back, they see something that just absolutely stuns them, and for a few seconds, they're in shock. Then all of a sudden, they can see it. There's water coming out from underneath the garage door and the front door, and he realizes he's got a flood, and it must be from inside the house. So inside he races, and he sees the water pouring out of the pipes. Initially, he can't figure out where it's coming from, and he goes outside and he turns the main off. He can't recall having it on. In fact, he's certain that he turned it off, but what happened is the landscaper was never told that Mark was doing work inside the house, right? So when the landscaper was buttoning up that evening, he wanted to make sure all the plants were getting water, so he turned it on and he left. And as a result, the house was flooding for hours and hours. They do what any couple would do. They start an insurance claim, and they do that, and then they find out the very next day that the insurance company isn't going to cover this because there's no permits. Unskilled workers who aren't craftsmen and aren't licensed were doing the work on the house. So now they're on their own to clean this mess up, and there's water everywhere. Their mattresses are soaked, their clothes are soaked, everything is soaked. So Mark gets the appropriate equipment and gets the mess cleaned up. He has a shop vac and some blowers, and he does everything he can to dry it up, and he just continues to proceed with the work. Even though Emily begs him again to sell this mess and just buy a new home. Well, Mark's starting to think maybe he should do that, but he also feels like he's so far into this, all he needs to do is just keep going a little bit, right? But ultimately, when they go to bed that night, Mark doesn't really get any rest because him and Emily have what turns out to be the biggest fight of their life. She has absolutely had it. She can't take it anymore. She wants out of this mess. And as you may have guessed already, Mark's not having it. He just wants to power through and get this thing done and show her that he can do it. Now, about 3 days later, Emily's in the house, Mark's working on the house, and Emily's nose picks up on something. She smells mold. She knows she smells mold. And of course, Mark doesn't smell any of that. So she goes and gets a test kit, and yeah, that place tests positive for mold. Now what? This is where Mark really starts to consider moving. And she's totally relieved that this is a thought that he's having. Clearly, the project is bigger than he is capable. He gets that close. But he decides that he just needs a little more time. He can straighten this whole mess out. I'm not kidding you. That's what he decided. I'm sure Emily was up to here with it, but she lets him go forward. Now, just as a backup plan, I bring over a contractor who buys and sells homes for a living after he fixes them up. So we talk with him, but ultimately Mark feels like he's kind of gotten all the rough stuff behind him, and he pushes forward. So after not very much longer, he's got some drywall up, he's got the patches done, and he's began painting. And believe it or not, Emily's starting to come around. She's feeling a little bit proud of Mark's progress. But this is really disruptive, this whole thing, to their family life and their daily living. The twins were in there. They were wheezing a little bit, so they wanted the heck out of that environment. So what they did is they moved in with Emily's mom. So everybody's living over there. Mark's basically working on the house before work and after work and spending every waking moment when he's not at his job working on this house. And then one Monday morning, they get a knock at the door. It's the City of Phoenix building department, and they want to do an inspection on the house because it appears to them that somebody's been doing a lot of work on this place and they haven't pulled any permits. So now Mark's in big trouble. Obviously, the house gets red tagged, and the inspector demands that they cease all work until Mark pays his fines and goes and gets permits for all the work he's doing. So now Mark is feeling like all is lost. He's completely discouraged. He doesn't know what to do. Again, he's not sleeping too well, and his wife's not too happy either. So as Mark is having one of these sleepless nights, he's going through this whole crazy thinking process that he's always had. He's thinking about, what if he stopped and sold the house? What if they bought a new house? What if he powered through? And yeah, you guessed it, that's what he does. He decides to power through, and then he changes his mind. He realized, that's crazy, that's stupid. So they give me a call. We get that contractor back over. We get a few people to bid on it. And ultimately, a different contractor ends up buying the house for $55,000 more than they paid for it just a few short months ago. And they're able to move on with something that is probably a lot better fit for them. Mark ultimately admits that this is just something he had to get out of his system, and it was really immature of him to insist that they keep doing this. And so maybe he's grown a little bit from this thing. What we ended up finding for them was a builder spec home, a home that was 100% complete in a neighborhood that they loved in a price point that they could afford. So we signed the contract, and then a few short weeks later, they move into the house. The movers are there, the boxes are open, things are flying around, there's pizza there, all their friends are helping them. The boys are going crazy because they have their own room. They're excited about that. And then, while they're in the living room, they start to see a leak. Yeah, another water leak coming from the ceiling, dripping onto the floor. Can't believe it. But what it turns out to be is there was a condensation line in the HVAC system in the air conditioner, and it just disconnected and a little bit of water dripped through the ceiling. So the builder got on in there and they had the whole thing cleaned up in a day and a half. They were not too excited to see another leak, but it was also really a relief to know that there was a warranty on the house and they didn't have to worry about such things. As a final image, I just want you to just picture Mark's garage. He has a little workbench. None of the tools included on his bench are any heavy power tools that are required to remodel a house. All he's got are a few screwdrivers for hanging pictures, a couple of wrenches, a hammer, some simple tools to do simple things around the house. Mark has officially gotten out of the remodeling business, and now the family is totally enjoying their beautiful backyard. They've got a great pool. It's like a little resort back there. I don't know if you own a fixer-upper that you wish you didn't own, or if you're looking to buy a new home. In either case, I'd love to help you with any of those things. I'm John Cunningham with eXp Realty. See ya.